The 5 types of women men never forget. Carl Jung, have you ever wondered why some women linger in the back of a man's mind long after the candles have burned out and the echoes of love have faded into silence? Why her name stays etched in the hidden corridors of his memory even if he can't explain it, even if he never admits it? These women are not always the most beautiful, the most agreeable, or the most available. They are something far more dangerous, far more unforgettable. They touch the soul, not the surface. Some women awaken a man, not the man he performs for the world, the one constructed from armor and ego. No, they reach the man beneath the mask. They tear at the unconscious, sometimes softly, sometimes like a hurricane. And once touched at that depth, he will never forget. He might leave her. He might marry someone safer. He might run sabotage or suppress. But the impact of meeting a woman who reflects his own soul or his own shadow is irreversible. Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And the women men never forget are the catalysts of such transformation. They are not merely women, they are mirrors of his anima, the feminine archetype buried within every man. In their presence, he confronts what is repressed, what he's longed for, and what he fears most. Some embody the wounded feminine, soft yet fierce, broken yet whole. She walks into his life carrying the weight of her own trauma, but she does not crumble. Instead, she alchemizes. She bleeds gold. He sees in her the beauty of resilience, the grace of scars that refuse to become shame. And suddenly, his own wounds feel seen, as if the boy inside him has finally found someone who understands the silent wars he never spoke of. He cannot forget the woman who teaches him that vulnerability is not weakness but sacred power. Others are chaos cloaked in elegance. They are the wild feminine, not the kind you tame but the kind you remember in dreams. She does not conform, and this terrifies him. She refuses to shrink. Her presence dismantles every illusion he has built to survive, every rule he thought governed the dance of attraction. She will not be owned, only honored. And if he tries to cage her, she disappears like a shadow at dawn. But oh, how he remembers. She may leave, but her absence is louder than most people's presence. Because in her gaze he saw possibility. In her laughter he heard freedom. And in her refusal to be his, she invited him to become his own. Then there are the ones who walk in silence like ancient priestesses of mystery. She does not demand attention. She does not seek validation. She knows her value, and that knowing makes her magnetic. Her stillness is a roar in a world addicted to noise. Men may not understand her, but they feel her. She moves through the room and the air changes. She touches no one yet leaves fingerprints on the soul. He remembers her because she was unlike anything his ego had ever prepared him for. She was not chasing, she was choosing. Choosing herself, choosing truth, choosing peace. And somehow that unbothered energy broke him in the best way. You see, men do not forget the women who forced them to evolve, not the ones who entertained their masks, but the ones who called forth their essence. Sometimes that woman is soft as prayer, and sometimes she's as unrelenting as fate. But always she is real, and that reality threatens everything false inside of him. She's not perfect, she's far from easy, but she is unforgettable because she showed him who he wasn't and who he could be. She is the shadow's invitation not to destruction but to integration. And whether he embraces her or runs from her, a reckoning begins the moment she enters his orbit. For Jung taught that every soul carries both the light and the shadow, and these unforgettable women are the ones who awaken both. They don't settle for surface games. They don't let you stay asleep. The woman a man never forgets is often the one who triggered his unraveling, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. She was the mirror he didn't ask for, the kind that doesn't flatter but reflects. She saw the boy beneath the bravado. She saw the emptiness beneath the accomplishment. She whispered truths that rattled his illusions. And when she walked away, she left him with the question that would haunt him for years. Why wasn't I enough for her? But he was never meant to be enough for her. He was meant to become enough for himself. Because these women, the unforgettable ones, don't complete a man. They confront him. Not with demands but with presence. Not with ultimatums but with energy. They carry the frequency of the sacred feminine, and that frequency is not always gentle. It is fierce. It burns. It breaks. And in breaking him, it offers him rebirth. He may not have had the strength to accept her love. He may not have had the courage to meet her where she stood, because she didn't need saving, she needed seeing. And if he could not see her depth, he was never meant to keep her. But he will remember her. He will remember how her silence said more than words, how her detachment wasn't cruelty but self-respect, how her presence felt like home and her absence like exile. Some women live in a man's memory because they gave him comfort, but the ones he never forgets are the ones who gave him clarity. He remembers the way she didn't chase him when he pulled away, the way she let him choose his own path and honored herself by walking hers, the way she cried without shame, laughed without restraint, and loved without conditions. She didn't need him to be a savior. She needed him to be sovereign. But sovereignty requires death, the death of the ego, the collapse of the persona. And not every man is ready to pay that price, so he lets her go, and she becomes the one who got away. But even in her leaving, she gives him a gift. She plants the seed of awakening. And long after she's gone, her energy lingers, not as a ghost, but as a guide. He sees her in the eyes of strangers. He hears her in quiet moments between noise. He feels her in the silence that follows success that still feels hollow. She doesn't haunt him, she humbles him. Because to forget her would mean forgetting himself, the self he glimpsed in her presence, the self she believed he could become. And what of her? She carries no bitterness, only wisdom. She loved him with purity but not with attachment. She offered him truth but not pressure. She saw his light even when he didn't, but she also saw his shadow. And when he chose to stay in it, she let him without judgment, without rescue. Because the unforgettable woman knows a man's journey is his own. Her role is not to lead him, but to awaken him. She walks away not as a punishment, but as a prayer, a silent invocation that one day he will become the man his soul longs to be. And when he does, perhaps they will meet again, not as wounded halves seeking completion, but as whole beings, sovereign in their essence, sacred in their union. But until then, she remains etched in his mind, a chapter that never closes, a flame that never dies. There is a woman who embodies stillness, yet her silence shatters illusions. She doesn't speak often, but when she does, her words pierce straight through the mask. She is the archetype of the high priestess, not in the mystic sense of spells and symbols, but in the way her intuition is a force of nature. She sees what others overlook, she senses what is unsaid. Her knowing is ancient. And when a man encounters her, he begins to realize how blind he has been. She doesn't ask him to explain. She watches, listens, waits. And in doing so, she awakens in him an uncomfortable truth that she cannot be deceived. Not because she is suspicious, but because she is deeply aligned with herself, with reality, with the unconscious currents that govern human behavior. He can lie to the world, he can lie to himself, but her eyes will reveal what the ego has buried, and that is terrifying. Yet he remembers her because for once he was fully seen. You may think men only remember women who gave them pleasure, who stroked their ego, who never left. But no, the opposite is true. The unforgettable woman is often the one who didn't fight to stay, who knew when to walk away, who loved fiercely but chose peace over performance. She doesn't beg, she blesses. With her departure, she teaches him the most painful kind of love, one that doesn't cling but expands, one that doesn't trap but transforms. Her absence is a lesson in presence. Her goodbye is a doorway to truth. And even years later, he will remember her strength. Not the kind that roars, but the kind that lets go without fear. The kind that loves without losing herself. The kind that says, I would have stayed if you met me in your truth, but I will not remain where I must shrink. She is unforgettable not because of what she gave, but because of what she refused to give up her essence. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. And these women are embodiments of that path. They are not perfect, but they are whole within themselves. They have faced their shadows, sat in their sorrow, reclaimed their power from every man parent culture and belief that tried to define them. They are not performing femininity, they are embodying it, and that is what leaves an imprint. She doesn't try to be the one, she is the one for herself. And in that self ownership, she becomes a reflection of what a man could become if he dared to face himself. She triggers the parts of him that are still afraid of depth, of surrender, of true love, the kind that doesn't flatter but refines. He may mock her to friends, dismiss her in words, but the body remembers. The soul remembers every nervous glance, every heartbeat that skipped, every moment he almost became who he was meant to be until fear pulled him back. And she doesn't hold it against him. She doesn't try to rewrite the ending. She blesses the bond for what it was, a meeting of two souls at a crossroads, a flash of light in the fog of becoming. Not every story is meant to last, but some are meant to mark. And you, if you've ever been this woman, if you've ever been forgotten by the world, but unforgettable to one man, know this: you were never too much. You were simply too real for a man still addicted to illusion. There's a difference between being remembered for how you made him feel and being remembered for how you made him see. One fades, the other echoes. There is a cruelty in awakening someone before they are ready, but there is also an honor in being the spark that begins that awakening. The unforgettable woman is both the fire and the consequence. He may resent her. He may call her intense, too deep, too complicated. But underneath the labels and the bravado, there is a quiet reverence, because in her presence he tasted something sacred, something no superficial game could replicate. She taught him that love is not possession, that passion is not performance, that beauty is not just skin but soul, and that real intimacy does not come from bodies colliding, but from souls colliding violently, vulnerably, irrevocably. And now every woman who comes after her is unconsciously measured against a standard she never meant to set. She doesn't haunt him like a ghost. She doesn't beg to be remembered. But her energy lingers like perfume on the collar of his past, and it ruins him for shallow love. Not because she cursed him, but because she blessed him with contrast. He can no longer unsee what she showed him. The giggling validation of the naive woman now feels empty. The desperate approval of the anxious lover now feels loud. The shallow seduction of the manipulative now feels cheap. Because once a man has tasted her, the woman who knew her darkness and wore it like silk, he cannot go back to pretending. She didn't chase him. She challenged him. She didn't flatter his ego. She questioned it. She didn't make herself easy to consume. She made herself impossible to forget. And yet she wasn't always confident. She wasn't always radiant. She too had fallen. She too had begged once, not for a man, but for her own self-worth. And it was in the ashes of those moments that she rose. Not as a goddess, not as a fantasy, but as a woman who had died and returned to life carrying the bones of her old self like armor. You see, what men remember is not perfection, it's power. Not the power to control, but the power to be fully, wildly, unapologetically. This woman doesn't ask to be seen. Her presence demands it. She doesn't try to impress. She is the impression. And what makes her unforgettable is not what she gives a man, but what she awakens within him even if he doesn't act on it. Even if he chooses someone safer, someone who won't ask him to dig through his father wounds, his addictions to approval, his need to dominate instead of feel. She doesn't try to fix him. She trusts his journey, but she will not dim for it. And if he cannot rise to meet her, she lets him go not with bitterness, but with quiet knowing. Because she has done the work to understand not every man who desires you can meet your depth. And that is not your failure. There's a certain kind of grief that comes with being unforgettable, the grief of never being fully claimed by the one you ignited. But there is also liberation, because she realizes in time that she was never meant to be remembered as his. She was meant to remember herself through him. He was the reflection, she was the flame. And now, even as he moves on somewhere deep inside, he knows no one will ever burn like she did, because she wasn't a fantasy, she was a reckoning. She was the one who spoke truth into his illusions, not by preaching, but by being. Her very existence contradicted everything he'd been taught about love, power, and women. She wasn't submissive, but she wasn't combative. She flowed like water and cut like a sword. She loved with depth, but not dependency. And in that paradox, she became unforgettable. He may try to recreate her, seek fragments of her in other bodies, mimic the conversations, revisit the music they once shared, but it never feels the same. Because she wasn't just a woman, she was an initiation into his own soul. That's what most people don't understand. The unforgettable woman doesn't hold power over a man because of her beauty or her mystery. She holds it because in her presence he encountered a forgotten part of himself. She mirrored his buried hunger, his silent softness, his capacity to feel deeply even when he couldn't articulate it. She didn't just turn him on, she turned him inward. And this is why she cannot be replaced. Because she was never a role, she was a mirror. And once a man has seen his soul, even just a glimpse, no shallow relationship can satisfy that longing again. Some women spend their lives trying to be unforgettable. They dress for it, speak for it, perform for it. But the truth is, unforgettable can't be faked. It's not in the appearance, it's in the energy. It's in the woman who chooses solitude over shallow companionship, who prioritizes healing over hiding, who learns to love herself so completely that being desired becomes irrelevant. It's in the woman who lets her past soften her instead of harden her, who knows how to be alone without being lonely, who doesn't use femininity to manipulate but to magnetize. She may not be loud, she may not be noticed by the masses, but to the right man, the one whose soul is ready, she will feel like thunder in slow motion. Because what makes her unforgettable is this: she is whole, not perfect, not flawless, but whole because she has made peace with her own shadow. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this woman, she became conscious. She faced her patterns, her projections, her pain. She stopped blaming others for her emptiness. She sat in the fire of her own undoing. And she emerged not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who had saved herself. That is the kind of woman who haunts a man. Because he didn't just lose her, he lost his chance to rise, to meet her, to become the man her love invited out of hiding. And that regret, whether admitted or buried, stays. She may never know how often he thinks of her, how many times he starts to message, then deletes, how many times he hears her laugh in a memory and feels a pang of what could have been. She doesn't need to know, because she's no longer waiting for closure, no longer holding her breath for his return. She has chosen herself. And in that choice, she becomes the most powerful force he's ever known, not because she is near, but because she is free. You may be this woman. You may be becoming her. And you may wonder, why did he forget the ones who gave him everything and remember me, the one who walked away? It's because you didn't give him everything. You gave him something true, and truth cannot be undone. There is a moment always where the man looks back. Maybe it's in the quiet of an early morning when the world hasn't woken up yet, or perhaps in the stillness after a fight with someone who doesn't see him. He remembers her then, not as nostalgia but as clarity. She was not the girl he could mold. She was the woman who refused to be anything but herself. And in that refusal, she forced him to confront how much of himself was just an echo of expectation, not essence. Men forget the women who never challenged their story, but the ones who disrupted it, they live forever in the spaces he doesn't talk about. This woman she did not try to seduce, she revealed. She peeled back the layers, asked the questions no one else dared to ask. She laughed at his charm when it wasn't backed by depth. She honored his vulnerability when he finally laid it bare. And she did not punish his fear, but she would not allow it to lead. She made him feel something he couldn't explain, and that frightened him. Because she didn't need him to be anything other than honest. And honesty for a man still building his worth on performance is a terrifying mirror. So he ran. He found safety in the arms of women who needed him more than they saw him, who validated his strength without challenging his weakness. And for a while it worked. The sex, the admiration, the easy rhythm of relationships that didn't require depth. But then always came the emptiness. Because once a man has tasted the real, he can't drink from plastic cups again. He remembers the sound of her voice when she spoke truth without dressing it up. He remembers the storm in her eyes, that wild feminine power that did not beg to be understood. He remembers how she let him go, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved herself too much to stay small. And perhaps the most unforgettable thing was this: she never made him earn her love, but she made him deserve her presence. It wasn't about rules, it wasn't about playing games, it was about frequency. She lived at a higher one, and he could feel it every time she looked at him without judgment, every time she forgave but didn't forget, every time she offered herself without needing to be chosen. She was the feminine in its fullest expression, fluid, intuitive, untamed. And no matter how much he tried to reduce her to a phase, a fantasy, a lesson, she rose above it all. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because her very existence was proof that the soul cannot be contained. He watched her evolve, maybe from afar, maybe through the filtered lens of social media, maybe through whispers from mutual friends. And while he smiled and moved on with life somewhere inside, he knew she didn't just move on. She ascended. Because this is what happens when a woman stops waiting to be remembered. She remembers herself. She stops trying to be unforgettable to a man who hasn't even met himself yet. She stops leaking her power in the hope that he'll wake up. And instead, she wakes herself up every damn day until her life becomes so radiant, so rooted, so rich with her own truth that whether or not he remembers her becomes irrelevant. And that is the moment he remembers her most, when she no longer needs to be. Because in a world of women trying to impress, perform, and please, she simply is whole, honest, unapologetic, a force of nature wrapped in a body that no longer bows to scarcity or fear. She was not unforgettable because she made him feel like a king. She was unforgettable because she made him question what kind of man he really was. She was never meant to be a chapter. She was the book he couldn't finish, the one he put down because the words got too close, too deep, too true. And yet her story lives inside him, a memory with no ending, a lesson with no closure. There's a particular kind of ache that comes not from being abandoned, but from being truly seen and still not chosen. And though it may look like she walked away unscarred, the truth is she bled in silence. She wept in the shadows he never entered. But instead of letting that pain make her bitter, she let it burn her clean. She is unforgettable because she allowed the fire of rejection to purify her, not poison her. She chose the lonely road of self-respect over the crowded road of compromise. She chose not to shrink for a love too small to hold her magnitude. She chose not to contort herself into someone more palatable, more digestible, more safe. And those choices, they cost her. But they also carved her into the kind of woman who leaves echoes in the soul long after her footsteps fade. He will remember the softness she offered without condition, the passion she gave without fear. But above all, he will remember that moment when he looked into her eyes and saw a woman who would never need to be rescued, only met. And that's what made her dangerous. Not her body, not her words, but her freedom. Her refusal to play small so he could feel big. Her unwillingness to stay silent so he could stay comfortable. Her devotion to truth, even when it meant breaking her own heart. She knew something most women don't. She knew that being unforgettable has nothing to do with how long you stay and everything to do with how deeply you impact. That the feminine isn't about decoration, it's about revelation. She revealed him to himself. And that's why she lives in the back of his mind like a ghost that won't be exorcised. She was a mirror, not just of what he loved, but of what he feared. The intensity she brought wasn't chaos, it was clarity. The emotions she stirred weren't manipulation. They were messages from his own buried soul screaming for truth in a world of lies. And that is why she was too much for the man who was not enough for himself. But she no longer carries that burden. She no longer waits for him to arrive to apologize, to evolve. She has mourned what could have been. She has buried the version of herself who would have stayed. And now she dances with the wind kisses, the sun walks alone, not because she's been abandoned, but because she's been initiated. The kind of woman men never forget is not the one who becomes their world. She is the one who shows them the world they've been hiding from. She doesn't beg for a place in his future. She becomes the reason he questions his past. She doesn't chase, she creates. A new way of loving, a new way of being, a new standard so high that it shatters every shallow substitute that follows. And if he never returns, that's okay, because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.